Well, thanks for being here with us. We've got a great American patriot, chairman of the Judiciary Committee, Jim Jordan. Thanks for happening.
Thanks for all the good work.
We're going to talk a little bit about border security and immigration. Obviously, it's a big priority. President Trump, when he came into office this year, he's made a lot of progress on it. So as you obviously have a unique perch being here in Congress. As you look at the first 150 or some odd days, and what the president and his team have done on that issue alone, right? And there's a lot of stuff in the news today about what's going on that came across the border during the Biden administration. What do you think are some of the big accomplishments that you've seen?
Certainly the border. First of all, he did what he said he was going to do.
Yeah.
And also thanks for all the good work you do in AFPI and all the great work. But I always say we make the job too complicated. It's pretty simple. What'd you tell the voters you're going to do when you ran for it? If you get elected, do what you said. And this was top issue. Right. I loved his line at the joint address to Congress when he said, people thought you needed new legislation. Turns out all you needed was a new president. Yeah. And he is literally the border. President Trump and his team have secured the border. And we got what were crossings the other day, like basically nothing.
Low.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So. That's just a testament to leadership, to the will to do the right thing. And I think it also points out just how bad it was. I mean, holy cow, 10 million people in 4 years. Remember what Biden did on day one. Biden did, and you know this because this is your area too. Day one, Joe Biden, January 20th, 2021 said, no more remain in Mexico, no more building the wall, and when you get here, you'll not be detained. Right. Well, Shazam, who wouldn't come?
Right.
Everyone came.
It's an invitation.
Yeah, it's a total. Open it up, and that's what happened. But President Trump said, and Tom Homeland and his team, we're gonna get in there, and Christie and everyone else, we're gonna make sure we have a secure border. So a true leader is projecting strength and doing what he said is exactly what he's accomplished.
Well, a lot of this has to do around resources, right? And so the Trump team is operating under a budget really developed during the Biden administration. And I know Congress is hard at work on a reconciliation package that would perhaps provide not only DHS, but other elements in the federal government that have this border security immigration mission, a few additional resources. Yeah. So why don't you talk to us a little bit about, at least in your viewpoint, what you think is most impactful embedded in that?
Our committee specifically resources to have 10,000 more agents, ICE agents, 100,000 more detention space, detention beds, the ability to finance and repatriate 1 million people. So 10,000, 100,000, 1 million is kind of how we think about what we allocated in resources from the Judiciary Committee in the reconciliation package. And then we took a kind of a different approach to. We said we're going to increase fees on people coming into our country on visas, and we took the sort of the fundamental position that why not have people who want to come to the greatest country in the world, who want to come here on a visa, why not have them cover the cost of securing our border and making sure we have the resources we need versus the American taxpayer? And so initially, I think our charge was to spend $110 billion over the administration. We were able to get that down to 80 based on all the stuff that President Trump had already did. And then we were able to also find fees, various fees, asylum fee, parole fee, different things we did to basically net out at zero, which we think is the way to treat taxpayers as well. So now some of that's it's got to go through the Senate, but that was what we were able to do from our committee. I was really proud of our committee staff and members' work on our portion of reconciliation.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. There's a lot of items in the bill that get a lot of attention, and you mentioned one of them, which are 100,000 beds, critically important to the deportation plan. But those fees on those various programs are really, really important. I know Congress has looked at that for decades. Yeah. How do you increase that, particularly conservatives and Republicans, to saying, look, the people that want to come here and want all these benefits from the United States government, let's actually make them pay for it. Yeah. And so that's a really great thing that you guys did. I hope it survives the Senate gauntlet.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. We think it's just kind of smart policy and a fairer way to treat the American taxpayer. Yeah. And then when you couple all that with what the American people have had to endure over the last 4 years with Biden in this issue, we just felt it made sense.
So on the beds, right before we leave the bill on the beds, you talked about 100,000 beds, right? Really, really important for the deportation plan that the president has talked about. Why is, I think a lot of people don't understand you need beds in order to deport people. That's pretty self-evident. But This will be the highest number of beds, I think, ever funded by the United States Congress and others. How does that feel amongst you and some of your colleagues here?
Again, I think it's just a reflection of the poor policies from the previous administration and what happens when you send the messages, as we talked about, that President Biden sent on day one, and when you, in essence, have an open border.
Yeah.
I always talk about the crazy positions of the left, and one of their positions is we shouldn't have a border. It's like that.
Right.
We remember now. This is probably, I don't know, 10, 12 years ago when Secretary Clinton, when she said we want a borderless hemisphere. Well, we tried it with Joe Biden. We tried it, and it didn't work too well.
Didn't work well at all. Interesting. I need to ask, obviously, you mentioned the bill's over in the Senate. They're going to take a look at it. There's some rumblings over there that they want to cut and pare that down pretty specifically. What's your view?
So far, it looks like most of the fees they have this bird process, this sort of arcane process that they go through in the Senate. But it looks like so far most of the fees are going to stay in. They made some changes to some of the other provisions. We had no money should go to sanctuary jurisdictions. Certain grant money shouldn't be. Some of that got taken out, unfortunately. The sanctuary jurisdiction stuff is complete baloney, by the way. Just complete baloney. Basically says like, oh, it's the policy of this particular political subdivision or jurisdiction. We're not going to let local law enforcement work with federal law enforcement. When federal law enforcement is enforcing federal laws, they get these detainers and they're like, no, we're going to release people to the street. It's just stupid. Yeah. I can't think of anything dumber. 2 agents can come to the jail and arrest a guy, but no, we're going to release him on bail out on the street and take 6 agents, and you jeopardize the safety of the agents, you jeopardize the safety of the public, and frankly, the migrant. It's stupid.
And then you get these protests, right? Because people see agents out in the streets, and you're like, well, if
so
you just would have let them come into
dumb.
the jail setting, it would have been a lot easier.
But it's the left. The left always gets it wrong. Every time they're always backwards, they always get it wrong, and on it goes.
So the reconciliation bill is a tax bill, budget bill. Some would say it's not a policy bill. There's a lot of probably policy that needs to get done. The president's done a lot, since January. I would assume a lot of that needs to be implemented into law so that a new president doesn't change that, right? We go back to the chaos that we saw under President Biden. Is that something that you guys are looking at from a policy perspective long term over the next couple of years?
Oh, yeah. Trying to get as many of the executive orders as he's done, trying to deal with the, in our committee, it's dealing with some of these federal judges. 677 federal district judges. Some of these guys think they're the president and not the actual president. And, the one bill we've passed out of the committee probably 2.5 months ago, and now passed the House, it's over in the Senate, is this idea that if a federal judge issues an injunction, it shouldn't apply nationwide. It should apply to the parties in the case in that respective jurisdiction. Just good common sense. And in fact, even like Justice Kagan on the Supreme Court said, has in the past said this is a concept that needs to happen. So we've passed it. We're doing oversight of these judges and stuff. So, but there are things that we need to get into law, and we're trying to do. We're trying to get as many of those things done as we can, but as you know, it takes 60 votes.
Yeah, no, it's tough. You mentioned judges, obviously, the great piece of legislation that you guys passed. I think as most Americans kind of look at the landscape and they say, who is, if President won on a pretty big mandate, who's thwarting the president's agenda? Yes, it could be some Democrats, but it's actually judges.
Yep.
Right? Time and time again. They're being very activist. So I love the piece of legislation. Are there other things that the team is thinking
Good question. We got 3 avenues in the legislative branch. You can do oversight. We had a hearing before we passed the bill out of the committee. We had a hearing where we talked about this issue. We had former Speaker Gingrich come in, gave sort of a historic, as a historian, he gave a great history lesson on it. Relatively recent phenomena. These federal district judges are doing this and having these nationwide injunctions. We learned in the oversight that they're typically waiving the entity that brings the suit. They waive the bond you're supposed to put up for it. We had that provision in reconciliation. It got taken out, unfortunately, to deal with that situation. So we do oversight. We pass legislation, as we talked about. And then we had a hearing yesterday in the Judiciary Committee, one of our subcommittees, on the budget for federal district courts. And you want to make sure you have the resources for security for judges, because we all know what, we all know after the Dobbs leak what happened to Justice Kavanaugh. But frankly, maybe it's time to say, maybe you shouldn't get 3 clerks. If you're going to act like you're the president, maybe there's some things we can do to sort of make the point that there are 3 separate and equal branches of government, and the guy who makes the call is the guy who put his name on the ballot, not some judge, and that's, of course, President Trump.
Yeah, and I think we've even seen here recently with the Supreme Court taking up a number of these, right? The third party or the third country, where you still have a judge in Boston, I believe, is like, no, my lower court ruling still stands.
Yeah.
And so there's mass confusion. Again, I think the American people are looking at it going, what? Like,
Yeah.
I thought the Supreme Court was the final decision here.
You may be thinking that's a really good point. We may also in our committee want to look at legislation that does some kind of, for decisions at the local level, even if an injunction, say, as an example, is limited to that jurisdiction, you still may want an expedited review. So you may want it to get to the Supreme Court even faster than the normal process for some of these key executive orders coming from the president.
Yeah. Well, the president and the team obviously have been focused on securing the border. Still got a big job ahead of them as far as deportations and things of that nature. But let's shift focus just for a minute when we talk about legal immigration, right? Which is, I think, we talk about all the different visa programs and ag visas, and we've seen the president recently saying, I want to not protect my farmers, but I want to do good things for my farmers and others. A lot of that is the legal side of immigration, and which hasn't been reformed in years, right? Is that something that, again, the team, yourself, and others are looking at when you look at, again, H-2A, H-2B, H-1B, chain, lottery, there's all these things. It's not, none of it's merit-based, right?
Right. The 1As, the 2As, the number, the shall, the may issued, and seasonal workers, and on it goes. It's the most complicated thing you've ever seen. So it probably needs some changes, but no one's ever been able to do it. No president. This is the one that could.
Exactly.
Because he has complete credibility on securing the border. He's done it in dramatic fashion, as we talked about earlier. So if it can get done, it's now. I would advocate the way to move forward is pass reconciliation, which makes sure those resources we talked about are there to keep our border secure. Countries sees that already. They say, like, okay, it's border secure. Because in the past it was always, the gang of 5, the gang of 500, the gang of whatever. We're going to put together a bill. And I was like, nah, we're not for that, because the country said, because all those proposals were some kind of visa reform, immigration reform, maybe even an amnesty provision, and we promised to secure the border later.
Yeah.
And the country was like, we ain't falling for that.
Right.
President Trump said, no, we're going to do it the right way. We're going to secure the border first, and then if we need to talk about things like ag workers, we can. So I think the way to go is pass reconciliation. Then we should, in the House, pass H.R. 2, which was tough.
Yes.
What we passed last Congress. And that's our plan out of the committee. Later in July, after we get this reconciliation done, pass H.R. 2, send it to the Senate and say, okay, what are you coming up with? It won't be Langford. It'll be something better than the Langford bill last Congress. We didn't like that. I don't think the country liked that. The president liked that. But then you have the negotiation, and at some point the president will say, this is what I want, and here's how we can put it together. If that happens, then I think the country will buy into whatever that product may be. But I think we have to stick with a tough position, at least initially, and then see what the president wants to do.
Yeah, no, such a good point. A couple more topics that we've seen in the news recently: student visas. Obviously, we see a lot going on about how the Trump administration is actually removing students off of those visas if they violate the requirements of that visa. Is that something, again, the committee, yourself, and others are looking at? I assume we're supportive of what President Trump and the team is doing.
It's funny how things change when last Congress and the Biden administration, after all the crazy stuff going on the campuses, the anti-Semitism and evil stuff and all that going on, we did some investigation. We found out, like, in many of these places, half the student body.
Right.
Like, I think Columbia was half the students were on some kind of foreign students on some kind of visa. And we actually sent letters to the State Department and to then Secretary Mayorkas, then Secretary Blinken, and say, like, how many of the people who've been engaged in crazy behavior, taking over the buildings on Columbia, different Harvard, whatever, doing the crazy stuff, how many of them are on student visas? And if they were, how many have been revoked? And we never got an answer from them.
Shocker.
Yeah, Mayorkas wouldn't answer us. Blinken said, well, we haven't got any, because he didn't know because first the Homeland Security would have to tell State Department. So that's how bad the Biden administration was. Now we have like people in Secretary Rubio
Yep.
and Secretary Noem who are working on that. So it's a little different from our perspective. So we'll assist them any way we can.
Yeah.
But the country's like, wait a minute, my tax dollars and financing these places and different things and student aid and all this stuff. It's like, and they're doing this crazy stuff and they're here on certain.
I think it's important for people to remember, like, coming over on a student visa is not a right.
Right.
It's a benefit. It's a benefit provided by the federal government, and so they have the ability to remove you if they don't like what you're doing and saying.
And maybe these places wouldn't charge so darn much money if they weren't, maybe
Yeah.
they'd like, well, we better lower our prices so, American students, who knows what would happen. We're doing a number of investigations on these so-called elite universities and whether they're colluding on tuition price. We had a great hearing a couple of weeks ago where we had this student from Brown who was harassed for simply asking, why are there 2 administrators for every 1 student? I think it was some crazy, or the other way around. Why there's 1 administrator for every 2 students? Like that's a lot of overhead. So yeah, we're looking at all that.
Yeah. And I'll end on this. So you've been very gracious with your time. Obviously, President Trump been very successful in the Iran-Israel conflict. But obviously, there's a big concern now about Iranian individuals that are here in the United States and why are they here and under what purpose. Yeah. A lot of them came in during President Biden's tenure here. I'm sure it's something that you're monitoring closely. And others, but I think the American people are like, hey, should we be concerned about this or should we not?
Well, I think the numbers are like 1,500 came to the border from Iran. Yeah. Like 700 some were released in. That doesn't talk about people we don't know about. I mean, really bad guys probably aren't like.
No, they're not raising their hands saying,
exactly.
I'm here, right?
And we know how evil Iran is. Remember, they talked about they wanted to try to assassinate President Trump in the campaign last year. It was like crazy stuff. So this is a concern. We feel so much better with President Trump and his team in place, and Secretary Rubio, Secretary Noem, looking at this. But it's real, and God bless President Trump for what he did last week. I mean, there is a special relationship between the United States and Israel. Mm-hmm. It's strategic, it's moral, it's Judeo-Christian, it's culture, it's all that, and. Israeli intelligence, American intelligence, IAEA all said they were getting close. President Trump said, we're not going to let this happen, and he had the courage to make sure it didn't happen.
Absolutely.
I was so impressed and supportive of what the president did. We were in Israel in February. I actually thought it might happen sooner because we were over there like, this is our 6th trip. And it's just amazing people, but what he did was phenomenal.
Well, sometimes that peace comes through the strength part, right? Peace through strength. So you got to have the strength.
Yeah.
Chairman Jordan,
Oh,
thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.